Good morning from the UK here. Welcome to OEG's latest webinar. And today we're going to be talking about business or leisure and the trend towards blended travel. Use the term blended, not leisure, which we don't really like, but I'm sure it'll come in once or twice today. This is a topic we've been talking about for a while, but we've never addressed it on the webinar really. So today's everything to do with business and leisure and how that sort of travel is changing. We're going to look specifically about the blurring of business and leisure, and whether I think that the relevance here is really in whether the industry needs to look at it as business plus a bit of leisure, leisure plus a bit of business, or whether we're seeing something completely different happen. And I've been in the industry for 35 years, and it does seem that travel patterns are changing quite fundamentally, really, and we're going to explore some of the reasons why that's happening. Part of that, demographics, younger people just asking more. Some of it is, changes as a result of COVID, but I think many of those changes were underway already. And we'll be looking at things like digital nomads and the other terms we use for some of the new types of travelers. As always, we'll take questions as we go, so please just use the chat function and ask your questions, and we'll try and answer them between us throughout. Today, as usual, we've got John Grant, Chief Analyst at OEG. Welcome, John. You're just back from Central Asia, I believe.
I am. Hi, Becca. Yeah, good trip last week to Central Asia. I'm just about holding it all together, Becca, this morning, because I know this is your last webinar before you finish after 45 years in the industry.
Yeah,
emotionally, I'm distraught and upset that we won't be doing this in July or August or September, but yeah,
very nice to say. I've had a long innings. I've seen a lot of change. So welcome, Gary. Welcome back. We've had you on the webinar a few times. It's really great to have you today. I know you've got lots to say about this, especially as regards hospitality industry and how they're adapting or perhaps not adapting to the new types of travelers. But really interesting to see, you had a nice piece in CNN yesterday about India. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about India? And we're not going to touch on India, I don't think, today, but you sounded quite excited by what's happening in India.
Yeah, hi Becca, hi John. Yeah, very interesting times in India, as we know. There's big buzz here in Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific. I think at the moment we've seen, the Chinese market took so long to come back, and the recovery is still quite slow. But India is a bit of a juggernaut that's moving quite fast. Where this goes, and the media loves to make these comparisons between China and India going forward. Yeah, very different countries, very different travel cultures, very different airline and aviation systems. But two huge countries, and India now, of course, is the world's most populous country, overtook China earlier this year. So there's a lot of focus on it, and there will be, as you know, going forward.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm really pleased you can join us today, and looking forward to what you have to say. A little bit less focus on perhaps OEG data. There's a bit less data around some of this subject, so lots of opportunity for opinions from both Gary and John. So as always, let's start though with a quick look at some data, what's happening in the industry. We've shown this slide a few times now, global capacity and how it's changed each year, and then split out as domestic and international. And John asked if we could add in this orange line. What would be the gap if back in 2019, the sort of growth we were seeing then, which was, I make capacity growth 3% between January 2019 and January 2020. So if we apply 4 years of 3% growth, where would we have been now? John, over to you to comment on this.
Yeah, well, I think the number says it already, doesn't it? We think we're doing well. We're back where we were in 2019, but actually there's a gap of about 76 million in terms of capacity if we'd have had that 4 years at 3% growth compounded. So, and that probably explains, Becca, why most airlines are looking forward into this summer with a really positive outlook in terms of performance, because capacity discipline continues, whether that's artificial discipline because there just are not enough aircraft available, they're slow coming off the production lines, and resources are limited, and all of these sort of things. But it just tells its own story, really, that, you know, airfares are horrifically expensive this summer still. I've even seen stories of an economy class airfare from China to the United States of over $10,000 at the moment, which is madness. And in Europe, you know, if you're looking for a transatlantic flight in the next 3 months, then you're going to be paying probably around £1,000 for an economy class seat as well. So airlines are looking forward to this summer, I think, and the profitability that they're going to see on their networks. But we've got a huge gap. We've got issues with production. You know, the 787 production line has been halted again yesterday. 90 aircraft need to be checked before they can be delivered to customers because of a very minor issue that's been spotted. So whilst I'm optimistic and I see, you know, we're back to where we were in 2019, it's a bit of a so what? It's 2020-23 type situation that we're facing.
Yeah, yeah. And how full are the planes?
Well, from my experiences last week in Central Asia, they are very full. You know, I couldn't be more surprised at how domestic flights in Uzbekistan were completely rammed. International services are full. If you're looking to get, as I say, get flights out of the United Kingdom at the moment, certainly over the next 6 weeks, it's very challenging, and prices are high. So I don't foresee that changing probably until end of September, early October, given where we are at the moment, height of the school holidays. It's a really good position for airlines, and you know that's reflected in those airfares I mentioned. You know, so it's classic supply and demand, and that's what's happened. And I think with the price of fuel, which we'll discuss later, being relatively low at the moment, it's fill your boots times for the airlines. And after 4 years,
what about the prospect of disruption, industrial disruption I'm thinking of in particular? So we know the last couple of years, you know, travelers have really not responded well to, you know, disruption and what happens at airports and sort of chaos. Are people aren't expecting that, or is that all going to be managed better this year? What are we likely to see?
Well, I think you'd be naive not to expect a French air traffic controller to take a day off in August or July and call it a strike. You know, that's par for the course. There's lots of rumblings about industrial action and disputes, working to rule no overtime throughout Europe. At Heathrow, we've got security staff who have threatened action. They cancelled their first strike, which was set for the end of this month, as they consider a new pay offer. But you know, it's likely that there will be disruption. Operationally, I think airlines are more resilient and airports are more resilient, and they're more geared up for these events. But these are the types of things that were happening in 2019 anyway. You know, these are just par for the course, summer type pieces of disruption. And of course, we can't forget and help to factor in global warming, thunderstorms. The southeast of England was battered by thunderstorms and heavy rain on Sunday of last week, and we saw flights being cancelled, diverted, and having to you know, be delayed for 5 or 6 hours. So there is going to be some disruption, and again, we've got some more information on that. We've looked at last year's patterns to see if we can see anything in that data that might help people in the future. But yeah, you know, take a book, make sure your Kindle's charged, and you've got yourself a big coffee, because there are going to be occasions when flights will operate late.
And John just referred to some data we've got. I think that's in this afternoon's webinar. So where this one, they're broadly similar, but this morning we're looking at a bit more about Asia Pacific, a little bit more about leisure, given we've got Gary with us. This afternoon's webinar, broadly similar, but we're going to be looking a bit more at some of the disruption factors, a bit more focus on Europe and North America. And our guest, quite late to announce is from American Express. So a little bit more focus on the implications for corporate travel of this desire by travellers to blend their travel, their business and leisure experience. So if you want to listen again today, then please do. And they will. The webinars are always available to download afterwards and watch later. So you can always pick up that information about disruption afterwards. Okay, let's have a look at this capacity by region, and then we're going to break it down a bit further, because the Asia number certainly doesn't tell the full story. You know, it's always one country versus another, has different patterns, and in particular in Asia, China makes quite a difference to what we're seeing. But John, this is sort of more of the same, really, isn't it? What we've been seeing for a while in terms of recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, this is against that point about high airfares and available capacity versus demand. In Asia, as you said, Becca, and we're going to break out China from the rest of Asia, and that will answer a question we've had in already about trend for the rest of this year. European capacity is down. I mean, you know, it's striking. There are still a couple of legacy airlines who are way behind the curve in terms of capacity and production this summer. Lufthansa being the most notable, who are about 20% below 2019 production levels. So, you know, that's very cautious. Latin America has bounced back very strongly on the basis of low-cost growth. Markets such as Colombia been very strong, and Brazil continues to grow. The Middle East is that minus 3.2%. You know, again, you need to distinguish between the big three airlines: Emirates, Qatar Airways, and, well, Etihad. And I guess, you know, we're going to have to start talking about Riyadh Air in the near future and about their growth and aspiration plans. And North America is quite interesting because it's only, you know, it's almost flat versus June 2019. But there's been a significant switch of capacity away from Asia and Northeast Asia into Europe and more domestic flying. So, you know, that explains high airfares to Asia at the moment from that part of the world, not helped by having to avoid Russian airspace. So it's a mixed bag by country and region for sure. But we're in a much better position than we were this time last year. In most markets, and particularly Asia, where we were desperate for it to reopen and still waiting for most parts to get open again.
And in terms of, I sort of joked earlier about how long I've been in the industry. Most of that time, you know, we worried about the lack of profitability in the industry, but actually, you know, this is surprisingly perhaps quite a good time really for the airlines.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't get too carried away. You know, I think
no, it's always cyclical. It'll change.
Yeah, and I think we need to put profitability in the industry in context. Even in the best of times, we know that half of airline profitability comes from the US airlines. If you add in those well-run airlines in other parts of the world, you know, we're putting maybe another 10, 12 airlines on that list. There are 700 plus airlines operating, and a large proportion of them continue to make losses on a calendarized basis. So if they do fill their boots and they're profitable over the summer season, you know, it gives them a bit more resilience going into the winter, but it will still be tough for those smaller markets, those carriers that don't have either a really exclusive niche position or just a floundering, wondering where they're going.
Yeah. Okay, what we're going to do now is just break down that Asia number a little bit. So we'll look at China first. And this chart here on the left, we've got capacity, so as measured by seats, and on the right, the same data, but for ASKs, available seat kilometers. So it reflects the distance flown as well, with June 19, June 23, domestic and international. So not surprising that we see ASKs historically making up a bigger proportion of Chinese international than on the seat basis, because the journeys are longer. Are we going to see that the question we had in earlier was, what's your outlook on China outbound travel? Will it reach 2019 levels, or will there be some hindrance to reaching pre-pandemic levels? Do you have a view on that, John?
My personal view is that they will not quite reach those levels, that they will be very strong. But, you know, China International really, if we think about the dates and the sequencing, then China officially announced it was going to reopen first week of January, caught everyone off guard. Takes a couple of months to put the processes in place again for people to start booking. And we probably lost the first quarter of the year, probably maybe even 4 months of international travel. And then we have to put on top of that issues Gary knows very well about: consumer confidence, accessibility to markets in that part of the world. So I don't think we're going to hit 2019 levels. And, you know, there's not a lot of capacity from China to North America at the moment. And that was a relatively big market for the Chinese airlines. So no, we're not going to, but I think, Gary, there's a lot more confidence in the international Chinese traveller returning throughout the rest of this year and into 24.
Definitely. We're seeing it throughout the region here in Southeast Asia. I was in Phuket a couple of weeks ago, and you look at the flight board, you know, there are flights there from cities like Hangzhou, Guangzhou, Beijing, Shanghai, Ningbo, city you probably wouldn't have really expected. But it was an interesting point that you said earlier, Becca, about are these flights full? And I actually watched a few of them come in and out, and some of them weren't full. But then there's probably a good reason for that it's not a particularly peak time for travel. And what we're really seeing, I think, at the moment from the Chinese media is they're really focusing the rebound this year around the Golden Week holidays, which if we go back to 2019 or 2018, we started to see a really strong year-round pattern of travel from China. Whereas this year, I think we're looking much more at the specific public holidays. And I think that tells its story. I think John is absolutely right. We lost much of the first quarter of the year. Tour group travel is still not fully functional. There's 60 countries around the world that are permitted to accept Chinese group tour travelers. And a lot of the big ones, you know, still aren't included in that list, including the UK and the US. And, you know, those group tour packages, they really impact the planning of the airlines because, you know, they take up so many seats at a time. So we're a long way from the full recovery. But in terms of the optimism, it's certainly there. But I think in this region at the moment, everybody wanted everything to happen all at once. And it's not quite like that. It's not just press and play and everything goes back to normal. So I was speaking to somebody from the industry last week, and they said the recovery will extend certainly through 2024 and possibly into the first half of 2025.
Okay, it's really helpful. Thank you. Let's look at the same information for the rest of Asia, so excluding China. So here we've got international seats down 23%, ASKs down 19%. So this is still a long way to go, isn't it, Gary, in terms of recovery? It's still Asia is taking a while, isn't it?
It is taking a while, and as John said, you know, flight prices are still high, and flight frequencies are just nowhere near where they used to be. And I was trying to go to Hong Kong in a couple of weeks' time, and there are just very few flights. You know, the prices are very high, but there just isn't very much choice, which is something that we did become used to 4 years ago. You know, you literally could go through the hours of a day and you know, pick and select your flight. And it's certainly that frequency that is really impacting the recovery. Still, it's still taking time to get back.
And why are airlines choosing to go with lower frequencies? Is it just that they don't have that capability, or is it that the demand isn't there?
I think it's a mixture of all of those things. I mean, John expressed this, you know, quite eloquently earlier in terms of the recovery. It just takes time. You know, a lot of the pilots are still on the ground. Some of the airlines are still on the ground. The supply chain of parts and recovery is still not quite there. Demand is still uncertain. Patterns of demand are still uncertain in a high price, high inflation era. You know, we got used to very low airfares. We got used in this region actually to quite a low cost of living in 2019. But you know, everybody's expenses throughout their lifestyle have gone up, and that's certainly impacting travel plans for sure.
Yeah,
I personally can't see this changing over the next 12 months, at least. You know, the availability of aircraft, bringing those aircraft that are available back online, the available resource crews to you know, fly these aircraft, and we're not even factoring in issues outside of Asia that will impact resources in Asia. So, for example, Riyadh Air, grand vision of Saudi for 2030, 300 million visitors, brand new airline, requires, a whole literally thousands of qualified staff, from cabin staff through to pilots, who are going to fly those aircraft, and they are going to have to pay top dollar to get those people, and they will pay top dollar, and it will attract qualified pilots, cabin crew with hours to move from markets such as Asia into Saudi Arabia for a period of time, whilst they earn a tax-free living and they can send money back to their families, etc. So the brain drain, for want of a better phrase, is going to impact the industry and will impact places like Asia, perhaps disproportionately more than they will Europe and North America. So I think it's going to be a really interesting period of time and disruptive in terms of resources and where they drift to in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole webinar probably on the impact of the Saudi plans and investment taking place there. Gary?
Yeah, it's definitely our region. I mean, John talked about the brain drain in terms of pilots and the airline industry, but it's across industries here in Asia Pacific. The really good tourism marketers right across the travel chain. Saudi Arabia is investing in people, and you look at destinations here, and there is real concern that Saudi Arabia wants to eat everybody's lunch in travel and tourism, and that will impact our region for sure.
I heard it's slightly tangential, but I heard a story about the hospitality sector in Neom, the Red Sea resort in Saudi Arabia, and their plan is to recruit all of their staff from Sharm el Sheikh and the Egyptian Red Sea resorts and just bring them across the water. Now, how do you suddenly backfill thousands of employees into another hotel industry that are not qualified, don't have the service standards, and have not been trained? So it's a really, really disruptive period of time, I think, that we're going to see, and it's going to impact every other market as well.
Okay, let's move on. We've got I think one more in this series here. So we also wondered about where has capacity come back this year. So what we're seeing here is top two charts, Southeast Asia, bottom two charts, Northeast Asia, of which a large part obviously is China, and just how much capacity there was in January, and then how it's moved through the year, and what we see clearly is the jump in capacity from March that's happened in Northeast Asia. So I guess that's what we're hoping will continue, isn't it? And then that will follow with more outbound travel.
Yeah, I think we're going to plateau like that, I think, through to where we are to the end of this summer season, so the end of October, because of all the issues we've discussed. It's quite interesting there's been a lot of additional capacity added very quietly. So for instance, nearly every major European market from China is now served at least 3 or 4 times a week. But there's been no great announcements about it. It's just quietly dripped in over time. And there's a lot more capacity that's now flying between China with Chinese-based carriers, domiciled carriers into Europe, and obviously flying through Russian airspace, which is upsetting the European airlines and IATA, saying it's unfair. It's a competitive advantage. So I think we'll probably plateau there for the rest of the summer, and then we'll go on perhaps in the winter and see some more capacity coming back.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting about the Chinese flights to Europe, because I have to say that has sort of passed me by, the growth there. And I guess I was hearing a year ago, well, in the future, the Chinese will focus on, the key markets, the entry points to Europe, the Paris, Heathrow, Frankfurt, Rome. But you're saying that actually there's many, many more smaller airports now getting service again from China.
Absolutely. And, geographically, on the most westerly points in Europe. So there is once again a service to Lisbon from China, and that previously had failed. So someone's trying that. Services to Madrid, obviously all the major European gateways, Edinburgh and Manchester, secondary airports in the United Kingdom. now have their services back to China. So very quietly, it's all coming back in, and of course it will be bolstered to a degree in the August-September period by the outbound Chinese student market, which we haven't seen for the last couple of years. Gary, I don't know how you feel that's going to trade and perform in the next couple of months. It was very strong.
Yeah, it certainly was. And there's one thing that Australia in particular is really pinning its hopes on. There was an article in the Australian media last week about just how important the student education market is for Australia. We'll talk about this when we get to blended travel. But there is a concern that, you know, the actual inbound travel from around the region has been a bit slow, and the reliance on the Chinese education market is going to be even more pronounced this year than perhaps before. And as you say, John, into North America, into the UK, into Europe as well. Yeah, Chinese students are going to be traveling at a huge clip this year. And, you know, that's going to impact our region as well. Countries like Singapore, Malaysia, definitely will be attracting more university students from China.
Yeah, we'll come on to that, I'm sure, in the discussion about the type of travel. Okay, one more here. Fuel prices. This is taken from the IATA website. Has the jet fuel price. We look over the last year now. I mean, aside from the blips at the beginning of January, you know, there was a bit of a high, and I think there was a bit of concern about the high prices. But when you look now over the past year, we've had it looks like a year of falling prices, doesn't it? So that's, I think you alluded to that earlier, John, just that this is also helpful for the airlines at this point in time, because fuel is probably their most expensive budget item.
And the one over which many airlines have least control. Yeah, so it's good that it's come down, and also, you know, overlay on top of that a slightly weaker US dollar than we've seen this time last year in many markets. So, you know, some of the cost of operating are certainly heading in the right direction. To offset that, of course, you know, we've got inflation, we've got increases in salaries, some phenomenal collective bargaining agreements from the United States, 30% salary increases for US pilots in all of the US majors have been negotiated that roll out over the next 3 years. But yeah, it's come down. I think the point you make on the other side, Becca, about SAF and the price of sustainable aviation fuel and the taxation that's likely to be imposed upon it. You know, the airline industry goes sort of, it reels from being battered in one direction to being battered in another direction. And if it's taxed heavily on SAF, then there's no incentive for airlines to actually progress their development of SAF and take on board more. You know, the industry's finally is beginning to realize and beginning to say that, you know, its targets for zero emissions and offset programs are not achievable in the timeframes that have been set. And it's taken us a long time to actually come clean and realize that it's not possible. So we've got a lot of work to do. And there's many people working on it and making progress in all sorts of ways, but it's this is a challenge that's going to be with us for the next 20 or 30 years for sure.
Yeah.
John, coming back to this jet fuel price, is this just cyclical, do you think? I mean, is this downturn just a cyclical trend in oil prices? And you look at how closely it trades against crude. Saudi Arabia wants to cut production. OPEC is saying, well, it doesn't want to do that at the moment. Are we likely to see a bounce back upwards of fuel prices?
Gary, it's you know, it's impacted by all sorts of things. Obviously, production, supply is a big issue. Political sentiment can be very significant. You know, whatever happens in Ukraine, however bad the winter looks, all of these sort of things. Storage. I read a story last week about 3 major storage supplies or facilities being wound down for a period of time for repair and maintenance. So, you know, all of these factors have an influence upon it. So we'll have to wait and see. But I'd be surprised if we went back to the prices we were seeing at the end of December and end of 2022. You know, there is a, if you took a blended average, maybe there's an upside of another 15–20% in terms of price. But I think, well, if there's no escalation of the dispute and events in the Ukraine and Russia, or no outbreaks of political uncertainty anywhere, then I think, you know, it's getting better for the airline industry.
Yeah, and I guess we could have, you know, shown a chart that went further back, but this initial spike here in March 22 was Ukraine, which, you know, it led to a big, you know, an increase in the jet fuel price at that point. Okay, let's have a look at start to look at some of the factors affecting the way we travel differently. OAG has done a survey recently in the United States, so perhaps, you know, not relevant perhaps to every market. The survey is available on their website. They interviewed 2,000 North American travelers, I think in March, or was it April, John? And I've just summarized here a few of the findings they found, and quite a lot of it was about the generational differences, so that seemed quite relevant to put in here. And on the right hand side, I've just for those who get confused by the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, just what each generation, how they're generally defined, and there's lots of ways to define them, but broadly this is the sort of way people use them. So the period that people are born in, and different the different characteristics of these generations, you know, particularly the younger people, Gen Z in particular, just digital natives. They're the people who've grown up with technology, and it's really changed the way they see the world, aside from a whole bunch of other things that have happened in society. But it does make for different patterns of behavior, especially when it comes to travel. So the survey found baby boomers are prioritizing leisure, while millennials are prioritizing sustainability. Baby boomers traveling for leisure more than any other generation. The younger ones, Gen Z, millennials, traveling more for business. On-time performance is a crucial lever in determining loyalty, and travelers' expectations that airlines proactively communicate schedule changes in real time. So that desire to, you know, if they've got their phone to hand all the time, they want to know exactly what's happening here and now. John, you've been looking at this survey results, haven't you? Are there sort of particular takeaways that are relevant for the sort of blended travel?
Yeah, interesting, Becca, because I have family members that qualify in 3 of these categories. You know, sadly, I'm probably in the baby boomer category, but only just. And I've got a Y and a Z with me, and you know, I can absolutely relate to the findings of the survey in the ways that we think about travel, and the way we behave. And you know, that's in a family where for my whole career, not 45 years, but my whole career, I've worked in travel and the airline industries. And absolutely, you know, when I've been traveling this year, that baby boomer category is all about, we called it revenge spending, but I think it's more than that now. You know, they are out there, they are very active. They're all hitting 2 or 3 bucket list destinations that in the next 12 months sort of thing. So they're very, very high frequency and high frequency travelers spending lots of money when they travel. And yet there's even a difference between a Y and a Z, or certainly in my case, the way they think about travel, what they want to do, how they want to spend their money. And I keep, whenever I see this, I keep thinking back to Japan and some work we did in Japan for a client a few years ago. And you know, the rest of the world probably doesn't realize that the Japanese population is still in terminal decline, and that for many years the Japanese traveler has been increasingly reluctant to travel overseas and is much more conscious about their travel footprint, and wants to travel domestically rather than internationally. So I think we're seeing some stark differences between generations, and airlines, travel agents, tour operators, you you know, should be taking some of the thinking away and blending that into their travel and product propositions in the coming years.
And I know we sometimes, I've put that in here, you know, sometimes we refer to millennials as entitled. My apologies to any millennials listening. But actually, in many ways, from the airline point of view, it's the baby boomers who are behaving like they're entitled to extra legroom, entitled to, you know, an upgrade to business class, and they're going to pay for it. And so the baby boomers travel pattern is quite good for the airlines at the moment, especially in terms of the ancillary revenue, isn't it? A real opportunity there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, ancillary revenues, fastest growing source of income for airlines around the world, I think, from everything from, you know, priority check-in through to lounges, excess baggage, advanced seat assignment. And I've said many times before, the more informed, the more commercially orientated airlines shouldn't be thinking about typical yields and average fares they get for their passenger. They should be thinking about revenue generated per seat. And, you know, it's just a physical space into which you can try and sell more product, generate more revenue. And airlines like Jet2, Spirit in the United States, and some in Asia are beginning to get to grips with this. It's a big opportunity for more cash. And of course, cash that previously either went to an airport or perhaps went into a tour operator's pockets. So it's, yeah, the world is changing rapidly.
So when I look at these generations, I'm very familiar with them here in Europe, and I know in the US, as the OAG survey shows, these are terms that are very familiar. Gary, across Asia Pacific, my sense is that these resonate there as well. That I guess the sort of trend towards younger people being digital natives actually generates the same sort of behaviour patterns in Asia Pacific as well.
Yeah, similar. I think the interesting case here is China. China tends not to talk about millennials or Gen Zs. It breaks that down even further, and it talks about the post-80s, the post-90s, and the post-2000s generation. So you've got 10-year segments. And as particularly the post-90s and the post-2000s, they've grown up, as you said, as digital natives. They've grown up with technology all around them, but they've also grown up in an era of complete growth. They've never really experienced an economy that is kind of struggling at the moment. The unemployment among young people is around 20% in China. Cost of living issues are there. Salaries are, salary growth isn't as high as it was before. So the younger generation is experiencing, a kind of learning curve, I think, that it wasn't expecting to, and that's exclusively because of COVID. And I think we've seen that so far this year. We've seen a lot more of the Gen Zs, the younger generation traveling domestically, making the most of their domestic trips, because it's still too expensive for them to travel overseas.
Yeah, okay. Very interesting. So you referred to COVID there. I guess we all know that COVID changed the way we live, and maybe some of these changes were in place before COVID, but COVID seemed to certainly accelerate those changes. With I've listed some of the changes here that we've seen. More of us working remotely or hybrid working. Whether we'd have even done this webinar before COVID, I don't know. We started these, I think, in the first one, John, was in March 2020, I think, because people wanted to know. And suddenly you realize that actually all these things are possible with us in different locations, and able to work in a different way from home, from different locations. So we got used to using the technology, and so there's that blurring of the line between work and leisure. Any broad comments, John, before we look a bit more?
Well, I just look at I don't look at the slide. I look at the right hand side of this webinar, and all three of us are working from home.
Yeah.
And certainly you and I were working from home before the pandemic. I'm sure Gary probably was as well. But it's that blended sort of combination of you're working from home. You may start earlier in the day. You will probably finish later in the day because you have clients, and it's a 24-hour industry we work in. But even within the working day, there are moments when it's far more acceptable to stop work and go out for a walk, or go down the gym for an hour, whatever it happens to be, or do something else and just reset your brain and get ready for the next task you need to do. So I think the pandemic probably gave most people a big nudge towards working from home, and now we've done it. We've got the technology. The internet is an amazing tool. Then I think we're just, for most countries, we're just quite happy to be at home and more efficient. The change in terms of commute time to and from work for many people, the savings in public transport cost. It just seems to me that it's very hard to drag people back into the office, certainly on a full-time basis.
So, Linda this afternoon, I know, has quite a bit to say about, some sectors are a bit, further ahead or behind the curve on accepting that, and particularly, I think not just in the States, but in Europe as well. There's some sectors that, they've got a lot of real estate, they want people back in offices. But let me ask both of you, have you combined work and leisure more consciously, do you think, in the last year or two?
Oh, absolutely. When I went to Australia in April, I consciously stopped in Singapore for some meetings with the OAG guys in Singapore, and I did some work while I was down in Australia. I think it's just effective use of time, and it allows you to blend both business and leisure. I think it's quite sensible. When you're working for clients and things like that, you're on the clock all the time. So I think it's just the way of the world. Whether it's going to be good or bad in the long run, I think still to be decided.
Gary?
Yeah, I think certainly more consciously. I think particularly here in Asia, because for 2 years we simply couldn't do it. So the ability to be able to do it now is just unleashed. That kind of excitement to be able to go and do business travel, go to conferences, go to meetings, and take some extra time before or after, or even during, and do the things that you want to do. And I think also, we talk very much about younger people being digital native and being very, very savvy with technology when they travel. But I think as business travelers, we use technology much better than we did before. We use apps. We're able to plan our trips much more effectively. We can find the things that we want to do. We can find our rides much easier. And some of those are portable now, particularly in Southeast Asia. These super apps. You can travel around the region and still use the same app for a lot of the lifestyle things or the convenient things that you want while you're traveling. And I think that makes a huge difference. And I would say that since the pandemic, I've noticed much more people traveling that way in this region for sure.
But Becca, just one example last week whilst I was in Uzbekistan. I mean, there are no taxi ranks. Everyone uses an app called Yandex, which is their equivalent of Uber. And within a day of being in Tashkent, all of your travel is being booked on Yandex, and you're just waiting for the driver to turn up, check the license plate, and you're off and running. And it's just so simple. Travel is so accessible now and so much easier that the savvy business person can get around in any country in the world. I'm delighted that you say working from home is a global phenomenon among the well-educated, because I think I've just realised I must be well-educated then.
Let's move on. Let's move on.
Put that there. Thank you.
Opinionated.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to look a little bit about business travel. It's very difficult to get good statistics about what's happening with business travel. And I know, John, over the last couple of years, you and I have sort of had I've been much more skeptical about the extent to which business travel will come back. And you're more of the, well, it'll come back. And all of these points I've listed here are things that I've heard people say. You've certainly said, well, the moment somebody loses a sale because somebody else was there face to face, then you'll go back to business travel. But equally, I've heard people saying, well, why travel to another office overseas when everyone there is working from home? It's not so easy to have an internal meeting, and if the business survived through COVID without the travel, is that just a budget item that isn't required? So where are you both feeling business travel will land in terms, I suppose I'm thinking more traditional business travel. Are people traveling less for business?
I don't think we've got the return of the road warrior or the air warrior yet, who's trudging around every week, going from country to country, client to client, and business travel is suffering. There's no doubt about that, and it is coming back in a different way. Surprising the airlines, I think, in a way that it's come back. You know, more leisure travellers purchasing business class fares, looking for a bit more service, a bit more space on the aircraft, and certainly in that baby boomer category. But I think it's going to take a bit of time for business travel to come back, if it even does in the same way. The world has been shooken up.
Yeah, I think in this region, the catalyst at the moment, and the industry is trying to catalyze business travel again, is through the conference sector, and that's really booming here. There's conferences every single day somewhere, and more than that. You know, look at the schedule for the rest of the year, and the conference sector, which used to be quite seasonal, at the moment looks as though it's pretty much year-round in Asia Pacific. And I think also the return of the Chinese business travel. I read a statistic a couple of weeks ago. I think that 60 or 70%, I can't remember, of the visa applications for Schengen were for from China, were for business travelers. So there's a high percentage of Chinese business travelers want to get back out, not just into our region, but further afield as well. So certainly the return of the Chinese business travel, and also the governmental travel. The governmental travel sector in China is huge. So we're going to see a catalyst and uplift from that for sure.
Right. Okay. That's useful. I know traditionally I tend to think of in Asia the sort of the face-to-face has been even more important than elsewhere, but was beginning to sense that maybe even that was changing. But it's interesting you say that the conference season is well underway.
Becca, one of the important things here is this comment, this observation about travel costs are high. You know, the return on investment is much harder to achieve at this moment in time for a salesperson who's out on the road. You know, we know ourselves, if we travel overseas, it's however you travel, it's always going to be a couple of £1,000 by the time you've built in hotel costs, getting to and
so
from
you really
the air.
have to justify it, you know, even more than before. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so maybe some of it is just as simple as price.
Yeah. So that's a real factor. And to Gary's point about the conference sector becoming more year-round, I wonder if you did a correlation between those conferences that are now in what used to be the old off-peak season. Are they being held in leisure-type destinations so people can actually combine a conference and a leisure experience at the same time? You know.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's absolutely true. You know, I think, you know, there was this big talk, wasn't there, during those dark days of the pandemic, that business travel wouldn't come back and that people would avoid cities. They wouldn't travel to cities because, you know, they're disease-ridden. But, you know, city travel in Asia at the moment is absolutely booming across the whole region, and will continue to do so. And as you say, John, the conference sector will support that.
Yeah. Okay, we want to have a look at some of the different ways that and the terms that are being used for blended travel, and I've seen all of these used. So I guess the core sort of sense of blended travel is business trips extended for leisure, perhaps delaying a return from a vacation, and then technically working from home while you're still away on you know, in the leisure destination, perhaps benefiting from cheaper fares and so on. There's the workation, so taking a break from your usual place of work, but not from the work itself. So just going and living in a different place for a bit, for a week or two, but working from there. Hush travel, when workers don't inform their bosses that they're going to be in a new destination. Digital nomads, which is the sort of work from anywhere type of style, and typically moving around quite a lot, month here, month there, continually on the move. And then the phrase, I start to hear tech pats, which is a bit like digital nomads, but perhaps a bit more affluent, you know, the technology professionals who can work anywhere really, and choose to do so. And you know, I've chosen a picture here of President Biden, who, you know, he was in Ireland recently, and very well publicized few days he took to his ancestral home in County Mayo. So that's your typical, in a sense, of blended travel. You know, he's using the opportunity of a work trip to extend the stay, and everybody is happy with that in a way that perhaps you wouldn't have publicised a few years ago.
Tremendous product endorsement for the Irish Tourism Board, of course. I'm not sure the messaging is right. It should say, that picture should say, "Joe, you're here." Excellent. Yeah, it's fascinating. We had clients in the Caribbean, as you know, Becca, who during the pandemic suddenly were offering 12-month stay tourist visas, so that people from the UK could go back to the Caribbean, be with family members, and have, you know, a much better sort of working environment, good internet access, better weather, etc., etc. And it's been a growing trend. And people in OAG have worked remotely in other parts of the world in recent times as well, taking advantage of these types of breaks and modes of working.
Yeah. So in terms of, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's a very salient picture there of Joe Biden. Go back even further, from China. Remember, Xi Jinping became sort of an influencer for travel. You know, remember those two famous pictures he took in the pub with David Cameron, and when he was at the Cliffs of Moher in Ireland. You know, that really generated a lot of travel from China, and so he became sort of this influencer for travel, which is quite an interesting concept.
Yeah, which plays into the whole digital native, living off Instagram, getting your information. You know, where do you get your information from about what you want to do? Is
I think part of all of this, Becca, is there is so much more movement in the workforce. You know, whereas people perhaps in that baby boomer generation that perhaps you and I may relate a little bit more closely to, stayed with the company for a period of time. You know, people now are, from generations X and Z or whatever, are quite happy to move around jobs, change careers, take horizontal movements, all of these sort of things. So if employers want to keep their workforce, they've got to be a bit more pragmatic about, you know, where they're working from, and be seen to be helping them in their overall work-life balance by accepting that, you know, there will be workations, there will be digital nomads, and there will be people who, you know, like it or not, will undertake hushed travel. It's the way of the world. Hushed travel is the new thing that happens on a Monday. You know, you take a weekend break and quietly you get back Monday evening.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a complex. I know Linda's going to be talking about this more this afternoon, but it's a complex world for employers now. You know, she was telling me yesterday, there's, you know, that I suppose what you've just said, the loyalty to an employer amongst younger people is very different. And if they're planning to move jobs every 3 years, for an employer, keeping them an extra 6 months, an extra year matters. And if things like travel are sort of make or break for them, then the onus is on the employer to be more flexible about what's permitted.
Yeah, and for airlines, how you revenue manage. You know, Sunday evening flights always used to be very busy, so you revenue manage and you price them higher. Monday morning you'd be full of businessmen, so you'd price them quite high. After 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock on a Monday, you'd be thinking, where am I going to find my traffic from? You know, because everything's died down. Now, of course, if you've got people who are doing hush travel or have taken a workation and staying a couple of days later, flying back on a Monday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon is absolutely what they want. So
we've got quite a lot of airlines among the attendees today. It'd be quite interesting to hear from a few of you how your revenue management has changed. Is it a challenge at the moment because the old rules of revenue management seem to have gone, or are you finding new patterns? Do use the chat and just let us know. I'm sure that would be interesting. In terms of the value of blended travel, the best I found was that Skift put an article together at the beginning of the year, which put it at $500 billion for last year, which is quite a lot. And we are seeing more reports of the impact. The Wall Street Journal reported that pre-pandemic business travelers generated 50% of airline profits but only represented 12% of travelers. And now American Airlines is reporting 45% of its business from blended travel. Gol in Brazil has said that its leisure or blended travel trips have boosted its earnings. Airbnb report that the average stay has got longer. And the data I pulled here is from the US TSA data. I saw a report that said that there was some evidence that people were traveling more at weekends than on weekdays for US Thanksgiving, and actually just staying somewhere a bit longer. And in a way, that's what we see here. We just took the capacity, the people who travel through the security at airports in the US over that 10-day Thanksgiving period in 2019 and 2022, and saw where the distribution was and how to change, and definitely seeing a bit more travel on the week. Seem to point to the fact that, yeah, people are saying, well, if I'm going to go somewhere for Thanksgiving, I'm going to go for the week and work somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think an adjunct point to that, Becca, I was at the Focusrite conference in Phoenix, Arizona at the end of last year, and the managing director of Google Travel made a point which sounds very, very obvious, but I thought was very, very good. He said that, you know, a lot of blended travel is to destinations that travelers probably wouldn't ordinarily choose to go to for themselves. And so that actually encourages them not just to spend time themselves, but to take a partner or even the family with them as well. So you therefore, you know, you get a surprise holiday or a short trip, which is in addition to the actual vacations that you would take during the year.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think another part of this, Becca, is, you know, with the cost of airfares being so high at this moment in time, the actual cost of extending a break, if it's being paid for by business travel or by your company, whatever it happens to be, just extending it 2 or 3 more days, as long as it doesn't see an increase in the airfare or a significant increase in the airfare, why not? You know, take advantage of it, because as Gary says, you might not go to that city again, and you may even have work colleagues that you can stay with or whatever it happens to be. I think it's just, you know, it's just an inevitable change from the experiences we've seen over the last 3 years and where airfares are today.
Right. Okay, we're getting close to the, you know, we need to finish up. So we've still got a couple more slides. I want to have a quick look at digital nomads as a particular group. Difficult to get some numbers on them, but the numbers I found from this particular source say maybe 35 million digital nomads. They put an economic value that's a bit higher than we saw for the blended travel, but I guess these are people who are staying in a destination for a longer period of time, living there and putting money into the economy there. No surprise perhaps that, you know, typically, you know, early 30s perhaps, typically single, pretty much all employed, often in well-paid jobs. Do these represent a specific group for airlines with their travel patterns, or what about the hospitality industry? I know, Gary, you're sort of concerned not just for this group, but all of the blended travel, that perhaps the hospitality industry hasn't really got to grips with the product that's needed for them. That is, they're tending to do business plus, you know, add on a bit of leisure, and adapt the products they've got now, or add a brand that would suit a digital nomad, but doesn't really understand how travel is changing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be honest with you, I haven't met a travel marketer anywhere in the world that understands the digital nomad market. I don't think anybody does. It's such an emerging and fluid and dynamic market. And whether it's long term, whether this is a transient thing, we don't really know that either. You are seeing a lot of the hotel brands just launching a lot of sort of hybrid lifestyle work, brands, new brands, which, you know, it's very, very difficult, I think, for digital nomads to connect with. A lot of digital nomads like to stay in apartments. They like to stay in Airbnb type areas, and that brings its own problems because they tend to congregate in similar areas, and that pushes up the rental prices in neighborhoods, which pushes out local residents. So there are a lot of issues there. But I think it's just such an emerging phenomenon that nobody's really got to grips with it yet, and certainly the hospitality industry hasn't at all.
Yeah, I was quite interested. I'm just going to flip to a slide that shows, I think there's 53 countries currently offering digital nomad visas. So where initially we saw it as something to offer in the pandemic to try and bring people back where normal tourism flows couldn't happen, this isn't new anymore, is it? We've had this in place for a while, and there's more countries looking at it. So it is a different way of being in another country.
There is, and I think there's also a dislocation here, really. The actual name itself, nomadism, is, most people I know who are digital nomads, they tend to stay for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, then move on to another destination. And these these digital nomad visas, they institutionalize something the digital nomads don't want institutionalized, because it, puts them on the radar of things like tax, the length of stay, that kind of thing. So there are a lot of issues around this, and it's understandable that governments want to control and understand where digital nomads are in their country, because they probably should have some tax liabilities, but in reality, almost impossible to govern, I think.
And, let's not forget the economic impact these nomads are having on those countries. They're spending money in those countries. They're creating employment that otherwise perhaps would not be there. And they tend to be there in off-peak periods as well as high seasons. So, it's actually really good for the tourism, hospitality sectors to have these nomads arriving in their countries.
Yeah, it's yeah, interesting. I've got one more slide here, and oh no, two actually. So the impact on the hospitality sector. I've pulled a couple of slides of data here from the World Tourism Organization, just showing how tourism receipts are still well down on pre-pandemic and tourist arrivals, perhaps a bit less so. So the receipts are down a lot more than the visitor numbers. I guess this actually, we've sort of covered it already, Gary, but how do you market to this group of people? How do you get the receipts up?
Really need good data, because you need to be able to identify who blended travelers are and what the different types of blended travelers are. I mean, we all travel in a blended way, but we all travel very, very differently. What is the data? I mean, I think there are a couple of points. For destinations, it does fall between their two pillars, and their pillars are leisure marketing and then the events and the business events side of things, and it kind of overlaps in the middle. For hotels, I mean, I think this is just an obvious point. I've stayed at so many hotels, conference resorts, where you get the rate for the conference during the conference, and then as soon as the conference is ended, you pay the premium rate again. You think, well, if I'm staying a little bit extra, why can't you give me more benefits? Why can't you give me a better rate? Why do you automatically put me back onto almost the rack rate? And you think, well, there's got to be a better way to market, and you need to use your data a little bit more effectively there, I think.
Yeah, and I guess for those of us in aviation, it used to be reasonably simple. I don't know. We used to assume that people in business class were probably traveling on business, and people in the back of the plane were traveling for leisure. And then, first of all, the low-cost carriers meant we saw a lot of business travelers traveling in low cost, and now we're seeing a load of leisure travelers in the front of the plane. And we can't look at cabins anymore as a sort of proxy for purpose of trip.
Absolutely not. That's well gone, I'm afraid. There are as many people traveling for leisure in the business cabins, and in fact even more so in first class. I think for those airlines that still have first class, it's probably it's a three-way split in first class, I suspect. A third of the people are actually traveling on business, a third are leisure, probably baby boomers, and the other third are airline employees traveling on rebate tickets.
Yeah. As it's always been a lot of airline employees up at the front. Okay, we've got just a few snippets from the OAG survey here, which I wanted to show you because they are relevant, because they talk about the different generations that we've already been talking about. The full survey details are available on OAG's website if you want to head over there and have a look. Interesting, obviously this is taken from the North American market, but I think a lot of this applies elsewhere. And I thought this one in particular was the most interesting, that the baby boomers are the most brand loyal, with only 15% switching airline loyalties. And that plays with what we were saying earlier about the younger generations. Just there's less loyalty, isn't something that is quite as ingrained, whether that's to an employer or whether that's to an airline, and that needs recognizing.
Yeah, it's it's so very true. I mean, my own personal experiences, I remain loyal to a couple of airlines where I possibly can, or alliances where I possibly can. Geography, I think, also has historically played a bigger influence on that baby boomer community as well. You know, if you're sitting in the US where this survey was conducted and you're in Detroit, then you're going to be Delta Airlines loyal because that's the only airline in town, sort of thing. So, you know, that takes a lot of shifting over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think particularly in China and certainly in Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia now, loyalty for younger people it doesn't exist, because from the consumer economy, the loyalty is to value. You know, younger people here are so used to buying products and services online now. They compare prices, they compare value. And that extends to everything. That's into travel booking. That's right across the chain. So younger people simply no degree of loyalty whatsoever.
It's really interesting. I think that's you know, for me, when I started in the industry, you know, the frequent flyer programs was such a big deal, and it was all about loyalty. So I think there's a real challenge there, isn't there? Just different ways to communicate with people are needed. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you both very much. We will be back this afternoon with another webinar looking at this topic again, but with a slightly different angle, a bit more about the corporate travel with Linda from American Express events and meetings. We'll be back in July. I'm not sure the date. I think it's going to be the 12th of July, so pop that date in there in your diary.
I'll be back.
You'll be back. I won't be back, but OEG will be back. Yeah, I'm taking.
We're going to miss you, Becca.
Yeah, I'm not leaving OEG. I'm stopping work, so you won't miss me. You'll be getting on with it all, and
we'll miss you. We're going to be.
Okay. As you all know, you will get a copy of the webinar afterwards. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you both, John and Gary, very much for your opinions and insights today.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
bye.
Cheers, Gary. Take care. Bye.